In this lesson, we're going to look at what I would call some of the most common post tags. Now, this is not an official WordPress grouping or organization of them. It's just what I think are the most common ones that you're going to see and use out there. So a lot of these you will have already seen used before, but we're going to go into a bit more depth with them now. So the first one is the ID, which will give you the ID for a post or page. This can be helpful if you just want to have that in your markup somewhere, maybe for a permalink or something like that. Or it could be useful if you need to query other data and you need to use the post ID to do that. Then we have the title, which will obviously give us the title for a page or post, and the content. So we've seen all of these before, but they do have some extra parameters, which we'll look at individually in a bit here. Then we have the excerpt, which will give us a either smaller version of the content or the content from the actual excerpt field in the post editor. And we have the category and the tags, which will display out the categories associated with the post and the tags. So these are by no means all of the tags that you will see regularly, but they are some of the most common ones. So let's take a look at each one of these in a bit more depth individually. We're going to start off here with the ID function. Notice that it is capitalized. That is important, both I and D. And if we were to look at the actual code behind it, it's actually just saying echo get the ID. So it's just a wrapper helper function to call something out. So you could potentially do this, but it's easier to echo out the ID this way. So where would we commonly see that? One of the places that we would see this in a theme is if we were to come into our index.php file for these example exercises and come down inside the article tag, notice that we have ID equal to post ID. So this allows us a few things. First of all, if we ever needed to create an internal link that just jumped down the page to a specific point, this is going to be unique for everyone here. So even though we're showing a blog listing, each article would get its own unique ID if you wanted to jump to it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you're working with JavaScript, you might need to know the ID, so you could potentially pull it out of this, just scraping after the post hyphen and getting the ID there to maybe make some calls with it on that end. And that's sort of the extent of it. It's semantically nice to have each thing marked individually, but it's not really doing anything extra special. Now, the other thing is that you may want to use this when you are maybe making some other calls, calling some other functions or template tags that might need the ID. You could use that there. And I want to point out that there are times where you will see the ID written differently. You'll see it written as this, and it'll say echo post ID. And the reason for that is when you call the post function in the loop, what it does behind the scenes, we're on the documentation for the post, which is used in the loop, it basically just makes the global query that you're in available, and we could reference it as $post. So that is what's going on behind the scenes that allows this to be done. And in fact, you could do title and you could do other things with it as well, but you'll most commonly see it written in this way. And the nice thing about this too is if you ever needed to pass it without echoing it out, you needed to just referencing it in a function call, you can't really use get ID because it's going to echo. So just to point out these extra things about the ID, again, to go back to this, it's the ID. This is going to echo it out, and also you'll see it as $post ID as well. So that covers ID. Let's go on to the next one. The next one that we want to look at is the title. So we've used the title before, but now let's come back and specifically look at some of the parameters we have. Notice that we have a before and after string that can be passed in. So this could be something like HTML markup. We could pass in markup, we could pass in extra text, we could pass in some dynamic phrase, and then finally we can determine whether it should be echoed out. So if we want to echo it out to the page, that's great. It will do that by default to be true. But if you ever want to save the title as a variable to be used in another way, then you could set this to false and it will not echo it out. It'll just save it. So on our site, let's come over to our blog listing page where we have a bunch of A2s linking to an article. And then when we click on it, we can see that we have an H1 that's displaying the title. In our code inside our index.html, notice that we have the H2, the A, and then the title here. Now we could also potentially do this a little bit differently. So I'm going to copy this and do it twice here to show you the other approach. So if we were to use the parameters, we could say, we would basically copy this And then we would concatenate in the permalink, which we would have to say, I think, get the permalink because we don't want it to echo out. We just want to get it. And then we can concatenate on the rest of our HTML. And so this whole string here, I know this isn't super clear. Let's give ourselves a bit more room to read it. There we go. So the title is going to pass this in as a before argument, and then we could do our after argument. We could do our after argument as well, and that is going to be the closing anchor tag and closing H2. So let's try this out on our site and see if we have the same thing for both of these now. Notice now, yes, we have the sticky twice. If we look at the markup, it should be the exact same. It's still linking the same, doing the same thing. So this brings up the question of why would you want to do this? Notice that this may read a little bit clearer. We don't have as much HTML inside of our PHP. It is separated out a bit, and a lot of people prefer this approach. The benefit to doing things this way, with everything passed as a parameter, is later on with filters, we would be able to say, hey, actually, if you're on this certain page, don't do this H2, just do an H1 instead. So that would allow us to basically say the title everywhere, and then we can control via functions.php whether, or maybe a plugin or something else like that, what kind of markup it should have depending on where it is. So there's no real right way to do this. I would say that this example up here is the most common. I would say that as you go through this course further and learn more about hooks, you may decide that this approach is better for you, or you may decide that you want to pull everything out, never pass anything, and control all your markup elsewhere. It's kind of up to you and what you're working with to determine that, but the title tag does go a little bit deeper than just how we would normally see it without passing any parameters. So that's a little bit more with the title tag. Let's go on to look at the content a bit more. Okay, so we're at this point probably very familiar with using the content. It basically displays out the content for page, post, attachment, whatever it is, but we do have some parameters here. Notice that we could set a string of text to be a read more link. So if we want to say like read more or continue more, the content can do that. We could also determine whether to strip the content out before the teaser. So you would only have the read more text and not your actual sneak peek content there. So in order to work with these extra parameters, we have to do things a little bit differently than we might think, and we have to use some functionality within the WordPress admin area. So let's come and take a look at this. We come back to our blog here, and right now I have it set to use the excerpt. So in our code, in our index.php file, we have the excerpt. So this is controlling blog listing pages, so therefore they're just going to show the excerpt. And we will come back to looking at the excerpt a little bit later, but what I want to change it to now is the content. So I'm going to change it to the content here, and I'm going to pass in a parameter that says read more. So this is going to be the text that I want to show up when there's more to read about it. So notice that for Sticky Post and Hello PHP, we have this read more, and we can click on that to go read more. However, for all the other posts, we don't see that displaying. And the reason for this has to do with something I mentioned you have to do within the WordPress admin area. So if we come in to edit our Sticky Post, you'll notice that it has this more link here. And the way we could get that, I'm going to delete it. In the admin toolbar, it says insert read more tag. And that will insert this tag here. From a text perspective, you could just do a comment like this, more, no spaces before or after it on its own line. What that does is tell WordPress, hey, if you're ever using the content on a listing page, meaning if you're not on a single page, then only show everything up to here. And this kind of acts as an automatic excerpt. Notice that the excerpt field here isn't filled in. We're just saying, hey, this is what I want to be my teaser, and then show the rest of it. Now, if we view the actual post, it's always going to show everything there because WordPress knows that if more is there and you're on a single page, which it knows that you are, then go ahead and show it all. But if you're on a listing page like the blog.php, we're not saying show the excerpt, we're saying show the content, except if there's this more link there, that will work. So one more thing we could do is come into our single.php, and where we have the content here, we're not going to say any read more because it knows that we're on a single page, so it won't show that anyways. But we can set the teaser content out when we're displaying it here. So we're on the single page of the content. We didn't pass anything for the first, and we're passing true, which is by default, it says false. We're passing this to true. And what that is going to do is when we come into our site, notice that everything before the more is no longer showing. So this is going to act as just kind of the excerpt to be shown elsewhere, but then on the actual page, that's not showing up. If we were to set this back to false or just leave it like this, notice that now that teaser content, as WordPress calls it, is showing up. So we've learned a few things here now. We've learned that we could add the more tag in or comment in that will allow the content to be dynamic and figure out where it should add a read more link, and you could change what the read more link says. And we've also learned that we could have this kind of more content either be shown or hidden on the page depending on what parameters you pass into the content. So that's the content right there. Again, you're probably not going to need to know these extra bits and pieces, but it is helpful to understand what's going on. Again, you should be able to start reading this stuff, figuring out what it does, and playing with it when you need it.